When the pond is still and you look into it, you can see your reflection. But when the pond is turbulent, when the waves and the ripples are chaotic, or there's a lot of activity, if you look into the pond, you can only see the waves and the ripples. You can't see your reflection. When you can quiet the mind and there's not a wave or a ripple, that's when you experience the true reflection of yourself and the true reflection of reality.
In a world moving faster than our minds were designed to handle, mental health is becoming one of the defining challenges of our time. Welcome to Mental Health in a Modern World with holistic health practitioner Greg Schmaus. After overcoming severe anxiety and OCD in his own life, Greg dedicated the past decade to helping others heal through a fully integrated approach to mental health, combining lifestyle coaching, psycho-emotional healing, mindfulness, and archetypal work. Over the years, he's facilitated thousands of sessions, guiding people back to peace, clarity, and a deeper connection with themselves. Each week, Greg shares powerful solo insights, conversations with leading voices in holistic healing, and immersive live coaching sessions that take you inside the healing process itself. New episodes every Friday. Follow the show and start reclaiming sovereignty over your mind in a modern world. Here's Greg.
Welcome back to Mental Health in a Modern World. So today's going to be a solo episode, and it's a really important topic: quieting a racing mind. And this is one of the most common topics that I get approached with in my one-on-one coaching practice and in a lot of my coaching and program offerings. And so in our modern world, this racy mind, this inability to quiet the inner chatter, for me is one of the biggest challenges in our world today. And it's a topic that we're going to explore in some depth today. And we're going to go into a variety of areas that a lot of times either get overlooked or a lot of conventional approaches that end up doing more harm than good when it comes to quieting the mind. And this is, one of the biggest challenges that I faced early on in my personal healing journey, struggling with severe anxiety, obsessive compulsive disorder, and struggling with a lot of thought ruminations, looping thoughts, intrusive thoughts, and really an inability to quiet that inner chatter. And so in this episode, we're going to take a deep dive into this topic because it's something that many, many people are struggling with nowadays. And so if you can't quiet your mind, it's really hard to find inner peace. The state of our mind is really the dictator of how we feel within ourselves. When we have a quiet mind, we feel at peace. When we have a racy mind, we feel a level of internal chaos. So the mind is really the creator of our reality. It's always the creator of our subjective experience. And so our experience of reality is really dictated by the mind. People say your thoughts create your reality. And from my experience, it's more your thoughts create your experience of reality, right? So your thoughts or your ideas are not necessarily going to immediately change the outer environment. Like if I think about a plane flying over my head right now, there's not a manifested plane gonna suddenly arrive and appear in my awareness. But whenever I am in a given environment, a given situation, or a given experience, the state of my mind is what dictates my experience. It's less the circumstance and more of my inner experience that creates my reality. And so when we can quiet a racy mind and quiet the inner chatter, it brings a level of peace and stillness within us despite whatever outer circumstance we might be going through. So quieting a racy mind is really a superpower that we all want to be able to tap into. Now, it's important to acknowledge the mind's purpose, and the mind's job is to think, just like a river's job is to flow. Everything has a purpose, and the mind's job is to think. So we don't want to try and force the mind to quiet itself. We want to be able to work with the mind and the flow of it exactly what it's meant to do, which is to think thoughts. The mind is kind of like an ocean. I'm going to offer a little analogy. So if the mind is this big, vast ocean, and each thought is like a wave or ripple on the ocean, we could say that everything on the surface of the ocean that you could see from above would be the conscious mind. So you see the activity of the waves and ripples on the surface, and that represents conscious thought that you're really aware of. Now the sea, the ocean underneath the surface, that deep sea that is filled with so much unknown, that would be the unconscious. And so for me, the ocean is really a beautiful analogy of mind. The movement of the ocean, the tide, the ripples, the waves, that's all the movement of thought. Now, when the water, the ocean, or a lake or a pond, whatever analogy you want to use, is calm, that's when the mind is still. And now, interestingly enough, if you go to a pond, when the pond is still and you look into it, you can see your reflection. But when the pond is turbulent, when the waves and the ripples are chaotic, where there's a lot of activity, if you look into the pond, you can only see the waves and the ripples. You can't see your reflection. So, this is also a beautiful analogy of when you can quiet the mind and there's not a wave or a ripple. That's when you experience the true reflection of yourself and the true reflection of reality. But as soon as the mind becomes turbulent, you're losing sight of your true essence. You're losing sight of the true reflective nature of reality because all you're experiencing is the turbulence and projection of the mind. So that's why I love using water analogies when it comes to working with the mind because they pair so beautifully well together. And so the mind is the ocean. Each thought is a wave on the ocean. The surface waves and the surface activity is the conscious mind. And then under the surface, the deep sea would represent the unconscious mind. Now, one of the purposes of mind is a process that divides reality into pieces, right? So the mind takes something in its whole form, chops it up into different isolated pieces or components, and that allows it to digest information, right? So the mind knows a dog different from a cat. The mind knows hot different from cold, right? So the mind is a process of division. It's called the logos cutter. So it cuts wholeness into divided parts in order to digest, quite similar to your physical digestive system where your physical digestive system takes food in the form of calories and nutrients, which is energy and information. So, your physical digestive system takes energy and information, it divides it or breaks it down into its isolated components and digests it and assimilates it. So, the mind actually does exactly the same thing. The mind takes energy and information from any given moment and it divides it and digests it into its isolated components so it can be assimilated as an experience, right? So the mind is really a digestive process on a psychological level, very similar to how the body digests on a physiological level. Now, the mind is what creates polarity, right? So we live in a world of polarity in this physical form. We live in a world of separation. We live in this really illusory world of duality, which is all a manifestation of mind, right? So, mind is what creates the polarity of up and down, light and dark, left and right, good and bad, wanted and unwanted, attachment and aversion, right? Pain and pleasure, right? So, the mind is what creates polarity. The mind is what divides everything into this dualistic experience. Now, healing the mind is always working with paradox. I found this to be especially true when I was working through a lot of my struggles with anxiety, with obsessive compulsive disorder, that healing the mind is always working with a paradox. Now, a paradox is a seemingly contradictory truth, right? And one of the most important paradoxes when it comes to healing the mind is what you resist persists. So, what you resist will persist. Whatever you push up against pushes back. Whatever you resist, you're feeding energy into it. If you try and stop the mind with force, it will come back with more force. So, a perfect analogy would be if you are by the pond and you notice waves or ripples in the pond, and you want to quiet the waves and the ripples in the pond. If you try and do it with your hand with force, you're like, oh, I'm going to take my hand, I'm going to try and smooth out the ripples in the pond. What are you going to end up doing? You're going to end up creating more ripples, right? So you're going to end up creating more waves, right? So that's a perfect analogy of mind of what you resist will persist. By trying to get rid of the ripples in the pond, you create more ripples. And so working with the mind is really working with the Tao. So my favorite book of all time is the Tao Te Ching. I like the Stephen Mitchell translation because for me, the teaching of the Tao is really the teaching of the mind. It teaches you how the mind works, and it invites you to move beyond the polarity or the dualistic nature of the mind. And so, one of the common verses, I think it's maybe verse 2, says, when you make something beautiful, something else becomes ugly. When you make something good, another thing becomes bad. When you make something right, another thing becomes wrong. And so, what the master does is the master moves beyond polarity. The master empties its mind by moving beyond desire, by moving beyond attachment and aversion, and into a state of observation, into a state of undifferentiated awareness, and into a state of what we would call the witness. Right. And so this is really what we're working with today is we're working with the true nature of mind, and we're working with the Tao to move beyond that dualistic or polarized existence into a state of undifferentiated awareness. Some people call that unity consciousness, where we see the unity beyond the illusion of duality. Now, when it comes to the mind, we could say two functions. From my experience, think about it like two sides of the coin. One side is attention and the other side is awareness, right? So if you take kind of like the yin yang symbol, yin is the feminine, yang is the masculine, attention would be the masculine, awareness would be the feminine. They're two sides of one coin of working with the mind. Now, attention relates to the capacity to focus your mind on a single point to the exclusion of anything else. All right. So if I focus my mind on a candle, I'm excluding everything else in my environment other than the candle. If I'm focusing my mind on you speaking to me, I'm attending to what you're saying to the exclusion of everything else. If I'm meditating where I'm focusing on my breath to the exclusion of everything else, that's a singular point of focus, that's sustained attention. Right? That's kind of like a fisherman using a spear, right? So you project the spear in one direction and you're excluding all other directions, all other possibilities. Awareness is the other side of the coin. Awareness relates to a state of inclusive observation in which everything is being witnessed and nothing is being excluded. So when I'm in a state of awareness, I'm not focusing my attention on anything specific. I'm being open and receptive to everything the moment and everything the environment has to offer without clinging to or attaching to anything or being an aversion to anything. This is kind of like fishing with a net, where you throw a net in and the net allows things to move in, allows things to flow out, and it has, you could say, no attachments and no aversions. Right. So we have these two sides of mind. We have the mind of attention and we have the mind of awareness, the yin and the yang, the masculine and the feminine. Now, to heal the mind, we must develop both attention and awareness. Right. So we have to practice sustained attention to heal the mind, and we have to practice open awareness to heal the mind. Now, our modern world, now the show is mental health in a modern world, so we always want to apply it to our modern day. Our modern world is really challenging our capacity for attention and our capacity for awareness. Attention is compromised via overstimulation and short form content. You notice that with a lot of the short form content and the overstimulation in our culture, especially via technology, people's attention span is very small. It's very minimal. I've seen some really frightening data in terms of how much attention span people have when they're looking at content on the internet. It's something like under 7 seconds. Now, awareness is compromised also via overstimulation, but it's also compromised through states of chronic stress and states of contraction. So, when we're in a state of contraction, whether it's mentally, physically, environmentally, emotionally, our sense of time, our sense of space, our modern world is very contracted, and our modern world is creating a lot of chronic stress. That immediately moves us into a sympathetic fight or flight state. It moves us into survival mode where we become more hyper vigilant than aware. There's a big difference between awareness and hypervigilance. Hypervigilance is more of a state of scanning, where awareness is more of an open focus. Right? So very big difference between awareness and hypervigilance. So our modern world has compromised our capacity for sustained attention and open awareness. And for me, meditation has always been the staple, the most important practice for cultivating attention and cultivating awareness. So I'm going to introduce two very simple practices, one for attention and one for awareness. I'll introduce the practice of attention first here and now. And then when we finish, I'll introduce just to break up the episode so we're not just doing back to back practices. We'll do one practice now, even just for 2 minutes. And then we'll do another practice at the end for maybe 2 or 3 minutes or so, just to break up our practices over the course of the episode. So we'll do our attention practice now and our awareness practice at the end. So if you're able to take a moment and close your eyes, if not, you can actually practice this meditation, even if you're just driving a car, if you're walking, if you're cooking, whatever it is that you're doing, you can potentially practice this meditation even while you're engaging in other activities. So just take a moment to close your eyes if you can, and notice your in breath and out breath through the inside of your nostrils. So you're going to breathe through the nose, in and out through the nostrils. And you're very simply going to focus your attention on the airflow, on the breath, in and out through your nose. And as you follow the breath in and out through your nose, we're very simply going to count the breath up to 10. You're going to do it silently in your mind. So as you inhale, you'll count 1. As you exhale, 2. As you inhale, 3. As you exhale, 4. As you inhale, 5. As you exhale, 6. As you inhale, 7. As you exhale, 8. As you inhale, 9. As you exhale, 10. And we'll start back at 1. We'll do one more round. Going at your own pace. When the mind wanders, come back to the breath. Come back to counting the breath up to 10 and following the breath through the inside of the nostrils. And then once you get to 10 for that second round, you can just bring yourself back, open your eyes. So it's a very simple practice of sustained attention where you're focusing your mind on a single point. You're focusing your mind on the breath. You're noticing the in breath and out breath through the inside of your nostrils. So that's your single point of focus. And then you're just counting the breath, which actually gives the mind something to do, gives the ego a little something to chew on. And it allows you to detach from the stream of unconscious thought that very often hooks us. So you focus on the breath, you count it to 10. And whenever you notice your mind wandering or getting distracted, you just very gently bring it back to following the breath and counting it to 10. And I highly recommend setting a timer for minimum of 5 minutes. 10 minutes is great. 15 minutes is even better. Anywhere from 10 to 20 minutes is a nice practice. But even if you just started with 5 minutes, it's a great starting point. And so as you're following the breath and you're repeating a mantra, it's kind of like when you adopt a dog and you're taking it for walks on the leash and you're training it to walk by your side. When you're following the breath and you're repeating the mantra, you're training the dog like, hey, walk by my side. Let's walk together. And then eventually it wants to veer off and go sniff something or bark at something or chase something. And just very gently with the leash, you're like, no, 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 just come back. It's okay. Just come back, walk by my side. Breath, mantra. A few seconds later, it wanders off over here, gets curious about something or gets hooked by a train of thought. Very gently bringing it back, walk by my side, breath, mantra. So training the mind with attention, with sustained attention, is very much like training a dog. The mind is kind of like an untrained puppy that we can work with. And meditation is very much the practice of training the mind like you would train a dog. Now, we're going to save the second practice of awareness till the end. Now, we have what's called the four functions of consciousness. And I believe this was first identified by Carl Jung. Now, the four functions of consciousness are thinking, feeling, sensation, and intuition, right? So, thinking relates to your mind and your thoughts, feeling relates to your body and your emotions, sensation represents your five senses, and your intuition represents you could say, extrasensory perception, whether it's through imagery, auditory, through the heart. So there's many ways that we can define intuition, and it shows up differently for many people. A lot of people receive intuition through images. A lot of people receive intuition through hearing, through auditory. Some people receive intuition through their body. So we have clairvoyance, we have clairaudience, we have clairsentience, and then we have claircognizance of just like a knowing, a deep knowing. So we have thinking, feeling, sensation, and intuition as the four functions of consciousness. Now, thinking and feeling are complementary opposites. Sensation and intuition are complementary opposites. We're going to focus on thinking and feeling in this episode because that's the most relevant to this topic. Now, thinking and feeling, like I said, are complementary opposites. So as one increases, the other decreases. And as the other increases, the other decreases. So the more you think, the less you feel. The more you feel, the less you think. This is really important when it comes to quieting the mind. Think of it like a seesaw. When one goes up, the other goes down. So when thinking goes up, feeling goes down. When feeling goes up, thinking goes down. So if someone can't quiet their mind, there's an excess of thinking, and there's usually a deficiency in feeling, right? So a lot of times the mind thinks to try and keep us away from feeling in the body, right? So one of the most important things when it comes to quieting the mind is orienting ourselves to what we're feeling in the body. The mind is very often the protector, trying to keep us away from unfelt feelings, whether it's grief, sadness, shame, fear. anger. A lot of the emotions that we don't want to feel sometimes go unprocessed. And the mind has this protective system that tries to keep us away from the vulnerability of feeling our emotions. Now, it's way less vulnerable for the ego to be caught in the realm of thought rather than to move into the domain of feeling. And so the mind becomes the protector that uses inner chatter as a way of keeping us almost living from the neck up to avoid us from feeling the vulnerability of what's happening within our heart, within our gut, within our body, within our emotional body or our feeling body. And so a contemplation when you have a racy mind is what am I resistant to feeling right now? And if you get curious about that, when you do have some mental chatter, it can very often bring you to the unprocessed emotion that the racy mind or the inner chatter was trying to keep you away from. And so, if you can drop into the body and really feel the emotion fully just through your feeling body, the more you access your feeling body, the more it quiets the mental body. Right. So, I'm just going to repeat that because that's really important. The more we can access the feeling body, the more we can quiet the mental body. And so, if you have a lot of mental chatter, what am I resistant to feeling right now? And then move into the feeling body with simple curiosity. And all you have to do is allow yourself to feel. The more you allow yourself to feel, you'll notice the mind starts to quiet down. So the next piece is working with negative thoughts. Now, why do we have negative thoughts? There's research that shows for the average person, 90% of thoughts are negative. Well, our mind and our nervous system is wired for survival. So, in order for us to survive, our mind has to be aware of the negative things, not the positive things. It's never a positive thing that killed you, it's always the potential threats that are a threat to your life. And so, negative thoughts are really the protectors that are trying to keep you safe, trying to keep you secure, and trying to keep you alive. Now, the challenge is that 90% of our thoughts are negative, and 90 to 95% of them are not rooted in reality, right? So it's kind of like the analogy I like to use going back to a dog. I love using dog analogies for the mind because it works so perfectly. Water analogies and dog analogies. Now, when you adopt a puppy, and let's say you're a homeowner and you have your house, maybe a little yard, and you bring that dog home, now what you start noticing is the dog starts barking. It starts barking at people walking by. It starts barking at the mailman or the mailwoman. Starts barking at the UPS driver or the Amazon truck. Starts barking at other dogs that are walking by with their owners. The puppy starts barking at a deer that's walking across the street. And so this puppy is barking at all of this activity going on outside, not knowing that 99.9% of that activity, they're not actually threats. They're not actually anything to be afraid of, but the puppy doesn't know that. So the puppy sees everything passing by as a threat, so it barks. But in reality, maybe 0.1% of them are actually threats. Now, the mind works in a very similar way. If you imagine each negative thought like the puppy barking, not knowing that it's potentially not a threat, but it's just going to bark anyway, the mind becomes almost like a watchdog that barks in the form of negative thoughts, trying to keep you safe, trying to protect your territory, trying to keep you alive, right? Keeping intruders out, etc. Now, a lot of people try and either push away negative thoughts or they try and replace negative thoughts with positive ones, which a lot of times those approaches don't really work very well. We're kind of demonizing the watchdog too much. And so, what I like to do is actually go to the other side of the spectrum, which is I like to thank the negative thoughts. Just like if I had a puppy that was barking at something, I'd say, "Oh, buddy, thank you. Thank you for trying to protect me. Thank you for looking out for me. Thank you for trying to keep me safe from whatever it is that you think we should be afraid of." And so the moment you start thanking your negative thoughts, just like you would thank a watchdog for trying to look out for you, it feels heard. It doesn't feel like you're in resistance to it. And it begins to quiet down and it begins to settle. And all of a sudden, you find a state of inner peace. And so, the most important thing when you're having negative thoughts is to not create resistance or opposition to it, but to actually express gratitude with it, seeing it as a watchdog or a protector that's just looking out for your sense of safety. So, we want to befriend these watchdogs, we want to befriend these protectors so we can come into a more benevolent relationship with them because we see that all negative thoughts have good intentions, which is protection. And so the more we relate to it that way, the more peace and less polarization we experience within ourselves. Now, intrusive thoughts is also something that's quite common, whether it's with OCD, with schizophrenia, with people who struggle with anxiety or panic. When it comes to intrusive thoughts, we want to ask ourselves, what makes a thought intrusive? What makes someone an intruder? If you're a homeowner or if you're just living at home and someone comes in and you consider them an intruder versus, let's say, a friend coming over, the difference is an intruder is someone that's entering your space that's unwanted, right? So an intruder is simply someone or something that's unwanted in your field, in your space, in your environment, in your inner or outer territory. And so the only thing that makes a thought intrusive is our resistance to it. Our mind saying, I don't want this here. I don't want this thought to be present. I used to struggle with a lot of intrusive thoughts until I realized that the only thing that was making the thought intrusive was me trying to keep it out, me trying to push it away, me seeing it as an intruder, my resistance to it. And so what I started to practice doing was once again go to the other side of the coin. I would welcome it in. Instead of the thought being an intruder, I would see it as an old friend coming over for tea. Come in, welcome. I'm curious about you. I'm here to listen, here to see what you want me to know. And as soon as you welcome the thought in, it's no longer an intruder. It's no longer intrusive and it loses its power. It loses its charge and it very often just dissolves. So the key to working with negative thoughts is see it as a watchdog, thank it, acknowledge it, offer gratitude. And the key to working with intrusive thoughts is to let go of the idea of an intruder and welcome it in like an old friend. Listen, be curious without being in resistance or being in a state of attachment. So, awareness, we're getting to a state of non attachment and non aversion to any thoughts that come into our awareness. Now, the next piece that we're going to touch upon is the breath. And the reason the breath is so important is the breath and the mind mirror each other via the autonomic nervous system, right? So when the mind is chaotic, the breath is usually chaotic. When the breath is running really fast, shallow, hyperventilating, the mind is usually in a chaotic state as well. But when we slow the breath down and we breathe diaphragmatically, we breathe slowly, the mind starts to slow down and match the pace of the breath. So the pace of the mind and the pace of the breath very often mirror each other. It's very uncommon that you're going to breathe really slowly and your mind's going to be racing. The mind's usually racing when the breath is also dysregulated. So the slower we breathe, the slower the mind. The more chaotic the breath, the more chaotic the mind. And this simply happens through the autonomic nervous system. The pace of the breath sends a signal to the autonomic nervous system whether we're safe, we can rest, digest, relax, restore, and the mind quiets down, or If the breath is chaotic, we move into a sympathetic fight or flight state in survival mode. And now all of our alarm systems of the mind are running and everything speeds up. I'm a big fan of practices such as square breathing, where you inhale, let's say for a count of 4, you hold the breath for a count of 4, you exhale for a count of 4, and then you hold the breath out for a count of 4. Square breathing is a great way to slow the pace of the breath down with a nice steady pace, tempo, or rhythm, and that is great for quieting the mind. Other tools that are great for quieting the mind, automated writing is really nice. So if you take out a journal and you set a timer for, say, 10 minutes, and you just start writing your full stream of consciousness in an automated way, and you just kind of do almost like a brain dump. Once the timer goes off, you stop, close the book, put it away. You don't even have to go back and reread it. So automated writing is really great. I'm a big fan of walking meditations. One of the walking meditations that I like to do is I actually take the square breathing of 4 in, 4 hold, 4 out, 4 hold, and I match that with the pace of my steps. So I'm going to inhale for 4 steps, I'm going to hold for 4 steps, I'm going to exhale for 4 steps, and then I'm going to hold for 4 steps. So matching the square breathing with the pace of your steps is a great walking meditation. I just focus on the soles of my feet touching the ground and touching the earth each time that I step as I'm matching the pace of my breath with it. There's a great book called Open Focus Brain that goes into open focus practices for cultivating more expanded states of awareness. And then I'm a big fan of parts work, specifically Richard Schwartz's system of internal family systems, for working with the mind as a multiplicity. Remember, the mind is a multiplicity of different parts that are playing different roles. So when we have these voices that are louder than others, or we have this inner chatter that can't quiet down, a lot of times these are what's called our protectors that are trying to keep us safe, keep exiles locked away, keep us from feeling certain things. And so working with parts and working with our protectors, which is a lot of the work that I do in my one on one coaching practice with clients, it's also a great way to quiet the mind. Now, to close, I'm going to bring you into that last little practice, which is the practice of awareness. So, if you're able to just take a moment and close your eyes, what I like to do is I like to imagine inside of myself climbing up to a watchtower. And as I climb up to the watchtower inside of me, I sit in the seat of awareness, a higher vantage point. And from the seat of awareness, from the watchtower, all I'm doing is I'm just observing. I'm not focusing on anything specific, but just observing what's happening within. I might notice a thought rise and fall, a feeling rise and fall, a sensation rise and fall. And I'm not doing really anything other than just observing the phenomena that's rising and falling inside of me. And if I do notice my mind getting distracted with thoughts, getting hooked by a certain train of thought, all I do in my mind is I say the word thinking as a way of noting it, and then I just come back to the watchtower. I sit, I observe, just watching. And if I notice distraction, chatter, I just say thinking as a way of labeling it, noting it. And then I just come back to the watchtower. Observe, witness. And if another distraction arises that I get hooked by, when I say the word thinking, I unhook myself and I come back. So just take another 60 seconds just sitting in the watchtower observing, beginning to create space between you as awareness and the thinking mind. the space between you as awareness and the thinking mind growing, expanding, increasing. Space between thoughts expanding, increasing. And the pace or rate of thought slowing down as you just sit in the watchtower observing. And if you do get snagged or hooked by anything, just use the word thinking to unhook yourself and come back. And then just slowly coming down the watchtower back into your body, back into this time and space. Come back and open your eyes. So that's a practice of awareness. You're sitting in the watchtower, you're just observing. If you get hooked by anything, you just note it with the word thinking, and you come back to a state of observation. Right, so you're not focusing on anything specifically, you're in this open state of awareness. You're watching, observing all the rising and fallings, the comings and goings. And if you do get hooked by anything, you just use the word thinking to note it and to bring yourself back. And so this gives you a few practices to work with and a few frameworks to work with when it comes to quieting the racing mind, quieting the inner chatter. Like I said, we begin to quiet the mind, as we begin to quiet the inner chatter, we can begin to see our true reflection. The pond starts to quiet, the pond starts to become still, and we can see our face, our original face. You know, the Buddhists have a koan, what is your original face before your mother was born? And these beautiful koans from, the Zen teachings can only be answered through a quiet mind, can't be solved through the intellect. And so, next steps for you on your healing journey, aside from these practices and what I shared with you in this podcast, this exact topic is why I created my online program, Healing the Mind, A Journey to Wholeness, which is my flagship 21-day program, mental health program, that really takes a holistic and integrative approach to mental health. No matter what you're struggling from, whether it's anxiety, depression, OCD, ADHD, whatever it might be, it's a 21-day program that takes you on a beautiful journey, really exploring the ins and outs of mental health from a really holistic perspective, including nutrition, sleep hygiene, movement, breath work, various meditations, various emotional healing techniques, inner child work, shadow work, exploring archetypes. It's really a beautiful program. And it's really the foundation of healing the mind. And I'm excited to share that program with you. So if you go to healing40.com/HTM and use the code podcast at checkout, all podcast listeners get 20% off. You can also just look in the show notes. You'll see the link below. I look forward to sharing more with you soon in a future episode. I'm sure I'll have something beautiful for you next week. So every Friday, new episodes. I'm going to be doing a few solo episodes coming up because there's a few topics I want to explore with you all. I'd also love to hear if there's any topics that you're really interested in that you would love for me to do a podcast on, whether it's a solo episode or have a great guest around a given topic. I'd love to hear from you. You can leave comments below. You can shoot me an email. You can go through my website. So I'd love to connect with you more intimately and really create this podcast to most serve your needs and your own healing journey at this time. Hope you have a beautiful rest of your day. I look forward to sharing more with you in next week's episode. Bye bye.